Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live webinar on cardiovascular pathology. Today's lecture is part 3 of a 4-part series on cardiac anatomy and dissection and will focus on the right side of the heart. Our speaker is Dr. Pradeep Vaideshwar, and Sir is Additional Professor of Pathology at St. GS Medical College and KEM Hospital, Mumbai. The talk will be followed by a live discussion by our expert panelists. We will also be accepting questions from the audience through our Facebook page, Cardiovascular Pathology. So I would like to invite you to begin.
Hello everyone, you all can see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Hello, yeah, okay. So welcome to the third session of examination of the heart. I wish to once again reiterate that these series of lectures are for an approach to cardiovascular pathology at autopsy, and the same pattern can be applied even to explanted hearts. I will not be discussing specific entities, and the pictures of certain conditions are shown only to drive certain points home. I am also not venturing into congenital anomalies unless they have been encountered in adolescents and adults. Now let us briefly recapitulate certain points which were covered in the initial sessions. The first session was devoted to the orientation of the heart, the appearance of the anterior and posterior surfaces. We also assessed the size and the appearance of the epicardial surface. We also observed the great arterial relations and their sizes. And finally, we correlated the thoracic situs with the abdominal situs, so that finally we gave the situs as either being situs soleus or solitus inversus, and rarely it can be situs ambiguous. The second session was devoted to the coronary arterial dissection and the appearance of the myocardium. So we observed the course, size, and dominance of the coronary arteries. We also saw the degree of stenosis and whether it was related to atherosclerotic disease or certain rarer non-atherosclerotic pathology. The myocardial assessment was performed by transverse sectioning, and if there was any kind of pathology, we actually bread-loafed the myocardium. We saw the thickness, the appearance and color, and the presence of hypertrophy and fibrosis, both on gross assessment as well as on histopathology. Now, with this background, we finally go and dissect or cut open the heart. Now, the heart may be dissected in the fresh state or after overnight fixation with buffered formalin. If overnight fixation is adopted, then care should be taken to flush out all the blood clots. Otherwise, the endocardial and the intimal surfaces will appear blood-stained. The dissection techniques are acquired from personal experience and may differ depending on the individual autopsy surgeon. Many older methods are now considered impractical for routine diagnostic pathology. The heart is usually cut as per the flow of blood, that is, the Virchow's inflow-outflow method, which has withstood the test of time. After opening the heart, the blood clots are removed and the heart is weighed. It is important to remember that the heart is approximately 0.45% of the body weight. Next, we come to the description of the various chambers, and both the right and the left-sided chambers are described as their inflow and outflow tracts. Now, the chambers are described with respect to the cavity size, the appearance and texture of the endocardium, and the thickness of the myocardium, which has been covered previously. The atrioventricular valves are described with reference to the size of their annuli, the commissures, leaflets, chordae, and papillary muscles, while arterial valves are described again with reference to the sizes of the annuli, commissures, and cusps. And very important for the arterial valves is the number of cusps. An important pathology that is seen over the valvular endocardium and sometimes even over the mural endocardium is the presence of vegetations. So this is the usual description that we apply to different structures of the heart. Now let us see the right side of the heart. The right side of the heart is dissected to 3 cuts. The first cut is made in the mid portion of the right atrium, extending it into its appendage. Alternatively, the chamber is cut along the probe, which is passed from the inferior caval vein into the superior caval vein. But this has to be done only after careful inspection of the veins and if sampling of the sinoatrial node is not expected in that particular autopsy. After opening, the tricuspid valve is inspected for any pathology. The orifice usually admits 3 fingers, which is just a rough estimate of the tricuspid valvular circumference. The second incision is then taken a little behind the right border of the heart from the right atrium into the right ventricle, passing through the tricuspid valve orifice and necessarily cutting the posterior tricuspid leaflet, as we will see a little later. The third cut is taken along the right ventricular outflow tract into the pulmonary artery and its branches via the pulmonary valve. So basically, these are the 3 cuts by which we will expose both the inflow and the outflow tract of the right side of the heart. So this is the opened out right side of the heart. This is the inflow tract, that is the right atrium, tricuspid valve, the right ventricle, and here we have opened the posterior tricuspid leaflet. This is the right ventricular tract showing the right ventricle, the pulmonary valve, and the pulmonary trunk. Now, all this has to be carefully assessed. So let us first start with the right-sided inflow tract, and we come to the right atrium. Now, the right atrium has 2 important landmarks by which we can identify the opened out chamber to have the morphology of the right atrium. I think in the initial first lecture, you would have remembered that even the right atrial appendage has a characteristic morphology. In the same way, even the inner aspect of the right atrium has important morphologies or landmarks. The true extent of the interatrial septum is confined to the fossa ovalis with its muscular antero-inferior rim, the limbus fossa ovalis. So this fossa ovalis is the first important landmark of the right atrium. Three veins enter the right atrium: the superior and inferior caval veins and the coronary sinus. This smooth surfaced venous component of the right atrium, also designated as the sinus venarum, is separated from the pectinated or the rough portion of the right atrial appendage by the second important landmark, which is the crista terminalis, the terminal crest. And we identified this crista on the external aspect as the sulcus terminalis. The inferior caval vein and the coronary sinus may be guarded by their respective valves, namely the Eustachian and the Thebesian valve. And here we can see a flap of tissue, which is nothing but the valve of the coronary sinus, that is the Thebesian valve. Now, what are the changes that we can sometimes encounter in the right atrial chamber? So now if you look closely at the fossa ovalis and compare it with the photograph that we saw initially, here we find that the fossa ovalis is present at a depression, or it has formed a well demarcated niche. The moment we see this appearance, we have to start probing the fossa ovalis, and here we discovered that this adult patient had a patent foramen ovale. Now here, this inflow tract is showing you a nice fossa ovalis, and just below the fossa ovalis, there is an unusually large opening of the coronary sinus. So the moment we have a dilated coronary sinus, it means that the patient has had a cardiac failure, or there might be an anomalous venous drainage into the coronary sinus. And in the adult patient, this anomalous vein that drains into the coronary sinus is the left superior vena cava. So this patient has both the right superior as well as the left superior vena caval veins, and this left SVC goes into the coronary sinus and then indirectly drains into the right atrium, as compared to the right superior vena cava, which drains directly into the right atrium along with the inferior vena cava. Now let me digress a little and show you the serial cross sections of the right lung. So what is easily seen is that there are multiple subpleural hemorrhagic wedge-shaped areas in the lung, along with some cavitation which has formed. So this is nothing but pulmonary infarction which has resulted because of multiple thromboemboli. So the moment we get pulmonary thromboembolism, which may produce sudden cardiac death or may produce infarct or hemorrhage, we always think of it being a embolus which is coming from the deep veins of the inferior extremity. So always our thought process goes as a deep vein thrombosis as a source for thromboembolism of the of the lungs. But please remember that we also have to think of certain thromboemboli which arises within the cardiac chambers itself. So always we have to carefully look and identify in situ thrombi within the right side producing pulmonary thromboembolism. So here we have an occlusive fresh thrombus which is present in the superior vena cava. This particular photograph shows you not only occlusive friable thrombus in the superior caval vein, but in addition, there is also a thrombus, mural thrombus in the atrium itself, which is below the superior vena cava and little posterior to the coronary sinus. And this often results whenever they do a venous catheterization. And normally the venous catheter should be present in the superior vena cava or little below the junction. But sometimes there is an excessive entry of the catheter and that can produce thrombi even within the chambers. So here we have thrombus in the SVC as well as in the right atrium. Now these in situ thrombi can take unusual appearances. So this is once again the posterior surface of the right atrium, and the interpectinate spaces are obliterated by these shiny, well endothelialized material. And when we took cross sections, we saw that the thickened and endocardium and the organized thrombus was enclosing the reddish brown thrombotic material which is still identified. So please remember that we have to inspect the right atrium carefully in all cases where there is either symptomatology, signs, or autopsy indication of pulmonary thromboembolism and its subsequent pulmonary pathology. Now, apart from SVC, we can also have thrombi which come from the inferior vena cava. Now, when thrombi come from the inferior vena cava, it can be actually a thrombus, or sometimes, very importantly, it can be a tumor thrombus. Now, here we have a very large thrombus which is practically occupying the entire right atrial chamber. And this was coming from the inferior vena cava. And this was a patient with an adrenal cortical carcinoma arising in a 37-year-old female patient. Similarly, apart from thrombi, tumor thrombi, we can actually frankly have true tumors within the right atrium, and this was an incidental right atrial myxoma attached to the right side of the interatrial septum, and surprisingly, this was an incidental finding in a pregnant woman, and unfortunately, she presented with sudden cardiac death. And sometimes you can have certain inflammations which simulate tumor. So please note that there are multiple gray-white to pale brown polypoidal projections into the various walls of the right atrium. Please also note that this pericardial cavity is enclosing a very thick layer of granular material, which was nothing but caseation necrosis, and all these masses are nothing but tuberculomas of the right atrium in a setting of tuberculous pericarditis. So please remember that we can have thrombi, we can have tumor thrombi, as well as non-thrombotic extensions into the right atrium. With that, we move to the appearance of the tricuspid valve. Now, the tricuspid valve, as its name suggests, has three leaflets: the anterior, the septal, and the posterior leaflets, and hence three commissures: the anteroseptal, posteroseptal, and the anteroposterior commissures. The leaflets are anchored to the right ventricle via tendinous cords to constantly well-developed anterior, this is the anterior papillary muscle, usually developed posterior and occasionally or rarely developed medial papillary muscles. So in this particular image, we can see the anterior papillary muscle, the posterior group of papillary muscles, but the septal tricuspid leaflet is directly attached to the right ventricular endocardium. So in this particular instance, there is no medial papillary muscle. Now, the other important aspect of the right atrium and the tricuspid valve. So what is it? So the internal aspect of both these provides the landmark of the Cox triangle, which is an established guide to the location of the atrioventricular node. Now, basically, this is an isosceles triangle. The base is formed at the opening of the coronary sinus. The two equal sides are formed by the hinge line of the septal tricuspid leaflet inferiorly and the eustachian ridge superiorly, which contains the tendon of Todaro if you carefully dissect in that area. And at the apex of this triangle lies the central fiber, above which is present the AV node, and this central fibrous body is pierced by the bundle of His, and then it divides into the left and the right bundles. So please remember, this is the utility of the morphology of the right atrium and the tricuspid valve. Let us see some anomalies of the tricuspid valve. So here we can see that the tricuspid valve leaflets, all of them are appearing quite myxomatous. Some of the chordae which are attached to the posterior leaflet are appearing a little membranous. And more importantly, what we see is that there is a space between the anterior and the septal tricuspid leaflets. So these are some of the subclinical anomalies which you can find in the tricuspid valve leaflet. Another specimen showing you a similar myxomatous change, but the arrows point out to an anomaly which is present at the tricuspid annulus, and this was nothing but calcification. So this is a rare example of calcification a chronic pulmonary. Now, this is what is more commonly seen over the tricuspid valve, especially when patients are hospitalized for a long time, have intravenous catheters, are on prolonged broad spectrum antibiotics, and the end result is presence of these large, friable, red-brown vegetations which are present both over the free margins. They are also present over the entire surface of the valve leaflet with some extension into the chordae as well as the papillary muscle. So in India or in our hospitals, this is the usual cause for tricuspid valvular endocarditis, whereas in other countries, it is quite frequently seen in intravenous drug abusers. So this is a very important finding that you always have to rule out in the tricuspid valve. I told you initially that the medial papillary muscle is hardly developed in most of us, but in this particular patient, there is a very prominent medial papillary muscle, and these both the leaflets appear to be directly attached to this papillary muscle. This is not like a rheumatic affliction of the tricuspid valve. And surprisingly, the posterior papillary muscle is very poorly developed. It is just seen as a bump over the posterior wall of the right ventricle. So sometimes you can get such anomalies. And here we have a beaded appearance of one of the corner of the septal tricuspid leaflet, and this yellowish structure was nothing but an organized thrombus or a vegetation over this chorda, again an incidental finding at autopsy. Now you can also see some openings which are nothing but the openings of the vein, the small veins of the heart, which directly open into the right or the left atrium, and they need not necessarily open into the coronary sinus. Now here we have both congenital as well as acquired pathology, which is affecting the right atrium and the tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve is showing marked fusion of the commissure between the septal and the anterior leaflets. So this was an example of a rheumatic tricuspid stenosis. And you also have a membranous shelf which sort of divides the right atrium on the posterior aspect into the superior and inferior portion. So this is an abnormal congenital septation of the right atrium. So hence it is important to observe all the structures of the right side as well as the left side. So observe all the structures of the heart carefully in any autopsy. And as I always have told you, that heart is an organ of suspense. You never know what is inside unless you open and look at it very carefully. Next, we come to the right ventricle. Now the right ventricle, as you can see here, is coarsely trabeculated, and it has got a very thin compact portion which measures 0.5 to 0.7 centimeters. So the moment we see this appearance of a ventricular chamber, whether it is located on the right side or the left side, you have to identify it as the right ventricle. It can be connected to the left atrium or it can be connected to the aorta. It does not matter. But the moment you see this morphology, you have to call it as the right ventricle. Now, the morphology of the right ventricle leads to subdivisions into three important components. That is the inlet, the trabecular or the sinus component, and the outlet component. The inlet component extends from the tricuspid annulus to the attachment of the chordae tendineae. The trabecular portion lies between the caudal attachments to the apex of the right ventricle, and any portion of the right ventricle beyond what is called as the septal band is the outlet portion. I will elaborate on the septal band a little later when we look at the right-sided outflow tract. Now, similar subdivisions can also be applied to the interventricular septum. And as we have read in our normal anatomy, the interventricular septum is both muscular and membranous. The muscular septum is sigmoid, and that too can have the inlet, the trabecular, and the outlet portions. This is the membranous portion of the interventricular septum, and the roof is formed at the attachment of the anteroseptal commissure. And please note that the membranous septum not only separates the left ventricle from the right ventricle, but also separates the left ventricle from the right atrium. So please remember that this would be the position of the interventricular septum, and you can see subtle bulge which is produced by this membranous septum. Now here is an image of the right ventricle. You can see that the trabeculae carneae are hypertrophied, and along with that, there is also an increased thickness of the compact portion, which is almost close to a centimeter. So this would be an example of right ventricular hypertrophy. There is hypertrophy of the free wall as well as of the trabeculae carneae, including the papillary muscle. And this right ventricular hypertrophy was as a result of an defect in the fossa ovalis. So this deficiency of the interatrial septum is much larger. So we cannot call it as a patent foramen ovale. So this we call it as a true atrial septal defect. So this was a 47-year-old patient who presented with dyspnea on exertion. He had congestive cardiac failure, and at autopsy, we discovered a large type of atrial septal defect, which is called as the secondum type. Now, in contrast to the hypertrophy of the compact portion of the right ventricle, here we have an extremely thin, almost papery thin right ventricular myocardium, and overall there is a very delicate trabecular network, and it looks a little hypertrabeculated as well. So this was an example of a rare type of cardiomyopathy, which is called as arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, which is characterized by parchment-like appearance of the right ventricle, which is appearing yellowish white in this particular case. Now, sometimes you can also have other types of cardiomyopathy. So here we have dilatation of the right-sided chambers. So there is dilated right atrium, there is dilated right ventricle, along with dilatation of the tricuspid annulus. The valve leaflets are, however, normal. What is characteristic of this particular right ventricular chamber is the presence of pearly white thickening of the right ventricular endocardium. In addition, this thickening of the endocardium has also obliterated the right ventricular sinus or trabecular portion, and this has produced a retraction of the right ventricular apex. Now, this cardiomyopathy was once again an incidental finding at autopsy, and this is called as endomyocardial fibrosis because as the disease progresses, the endocardial fibrosis can also produce fibrosis of the subendocardial endocardium. Here again, the fibrosis is accompanied by extensive infiltration of the adipose tissue. So this was once again an arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, a cause of sudden death in this particular patient, producing fibrosis as well as extensive adipose tissue infiltration. And you can also see some yellowish discoloration in the posterior wall as well as the septal portion of the right ventricle. Now here we have taken a longitudinal section of the heart, what we call as the four-chamber view. So thrombi are very frequently seen in the right atrium, but they are also seen in the right ventricle as well. And that is why when we breadloaf the right ventricle, we always have to carefully inspect the apical portion because that is the commonest area where the thrombi begin. So here we have the right ventricular apex obliterated by this laminated, friable, reddish-brown thrombus. So this was a case of dilated cardiomyopathy. Now, along with thrombi, we can also see presence of tumor, and this patient also had obliteration of the apex of the right ventricle by this sessile, polypoidal, extremely firm, pale red tumor mass, which was nothing but a metastatic squamous cell carcinoma occurring in a 32-year-old male patient who was operated for a moderately differentiated cancer of the tongue. Now with that, we finish off the inflow tract and we go on to the right-sided outflow tract, which is the right ventricle, pulmonary valve, and the pulmonary trunk. Now the right ventricle, leads to the pulmonary trunk via the pulmonary valve. Now the pulmonary valve has got three cusps, which are one anterior and two posterior. These are semilunar, delicate, and translucent. I told you that just like the inflow portion, the outflow portion of the right ventricle also shows additional muscular bands, and it does not appear coarsely trabeculated. Now, which are these muscle bands? I made a mention of the septal band. So this is the septal band, which is called as the trabeculoseptomarginalis. Now, at the base of this septal band, we see a small muscle band which is connecting the anterior papillary muscle which has been cut. So this muscle band is nothing but the moderator band through which the right bundle of His arborizes into the right ventricle. So the first important muscle band in the outflow tract is the trabeculoseptomarginalis with the moderator band. But this moderator band may be seen or may not be seen in all individuals. Now you can also see that towards the posterior portion, this septal band divides into two limbs, the anterior limb and the posterior limb. The posterior limb extends towards the tricuspid annulus, and the posterior limb extends towards the pulmonary annulus. And between the anterior and the posterior limb is another muscle band which is called as the crista supraventricularis. So all these bands are important and are seen in the outflow tract, and these bands become important whenever we are dealing with certain congenital anomalies. Now here is the pulmonary valve. It is not having three cusps, but it is showing four cusps. So this would be an example of a quadricuspid pulmonary valve. Now here again, there are only cusps. This is the anterior, the right posterior, and the left posterior cusp. And all these cusps are very markedly thickened. And you can see that the tricuspid valve is normal. So this is not an example of an acquired pathology, but this is a congenital anomaly. And this thickening, when seen as a congenital anomaly, is called as pulmonary valvular dysplasia. So this is a three-cuspid pulmonary valvular dysplasia, and this was responsible for producing congenital pulmonary stenosis, and this patient became symptomatic in the third decade of life. Now, normally the intima of the pulmonary trunk is smooth, shiny, and we can easily make out the yellow color of the elastic tissue of the media because the intima is also transparent. But here it has got a distinct cobblestoned or a tree bark sort of an appearance, but all the intimal plaques are characteristically yellowish. So this is an example of an exaggerated pulmonary atherosclerosis developing in a patient of rheumatic mitral stenosis with an extreme degree of pulmonary hypertension. So this was the right-sided, both inflow and outflow tract, and some of the common pathologies that can be seen as incidental finding at autopsy, or it can be a feature which has produced clinical symptoms, or it can be a feature which can also produce sudden cardiac death. So thank you very much.
Thank you for a wonderful lecture, sir. I think, I'm sure everyone has enjoyed the photographs. Before we open up the topic for discussion, I would like to extend a cordial welcome to Dr. Mary Shepherd, who's joining us for the first time.
Oh, thank you.
Hello, nice to see you all.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. Thank you for joining.
So I don't think there are any questions on the Facebook page yet, sir. So I would like to invite the panelists to begin the discussion.
One additional feature that you could describe in the right ventricle is the parietal band. The parietal band is the band that connects the anterior wall of the right ventricle to the posterior wall, and it is seen as an extension of the crista supraventricularis. In fact, you could see.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt you, but you're not audible. Sir, are you able to hear, ma'am?
I don't know what I can do.
Yeah, madam is saying that the parietal band is part of that crista supraventricularis. But the problem is that very often people use parietal band and crista almost interchangeably. So that is why I use the term crista, which is, sort of described in normal anatomy books.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt you, but you're not audible. Sir, are you able?
Is there any other comment?
So we have some comments on the page. Basically, greetings from around parts of Brazil, Philippines, Korea.
Oh, wow.
So hello to everyone around the world.
Yes.
Pradeep, that was wonderful. Beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Now, you were saying about the cause of endocarditis was IV drug abuse in the West. What did you say? I didn't quite catch about the endocarditis in India, in your part of the world. What's the major cause?
The major cause is prolonged hospitalization with broad-spectrum antibiotic therapy as well as intravenous lines. So these are the common causes that we see for endocarditis in India, the right-sided ones. Yes.
And could you comment?
And here I have to make a comment that it is thanks to Dr. Mary Shepherd that we got a chance to, sort of present to an international audience. And Dr. Mary Shepherd was the first person to invite me way back in 2011 for the South Africa conference. So thank you very much, Dr. Shepherd, for giving us this chance. And I'm happy that we are doing good work. I'm really appreciative of your efforts in sort of giving us an opportunity. Thank you very much.
And with Ivana, I think the European Association, in an association, I think it's opening up new communication and educational opportunities for all of us.
Yes, thank you.
Hopefully, we will also connect with the Society of Cardiovascular Pathology.
Yes.
I think this brings it home to me how wonderful the opportunity, and you have some wonderful material. Wonderful, absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
May I have a question?
Yes, yes.
as there is very many young colleagues and residents listening now, you show all of the hearts, they were like fixed, all these pictures. Is it like, do you recommend if you expect some heart pathology that you first fixed the whole heart and then you dissect it, fixate it? Or do you think that you can make the same findings also in a fresh specimen? What is your experience?
See, what I do, initially what we were doing, we were always doing perfusion fixation of the heart. But now what I do, if I find a particular abnormality of the heart on external aspect, I cut the heart in fresh. And we are able to pick up all the features which I showed you. We can pick up the same even on an unfixed heart. So I told in the beginning that it depends upon, individual, what shall I say, convenience. You can either cut it fresh or you can cut it fixed. So I think almost like 40% of the hearts now we cut after, 40% is cut unfixed and 60% is fixed.
Right.
So it depends upon external morphology.
Could you comment on the fact that in the right atrium, we have found recently a case of endocarditis of the aortic septum, where there was a bulging mass into the right atrium. Could you comment on your experience of that?
Somehow we have not seen too much of that interatrial septal hypertrophy, but even in obese patients, but sometimes maybe I think almost like 2 cases a year, not more than that. But an overall increase in adipose tissue we see with obesity, diabetics, as well as in alcoholics. But septal hypertrophy is very infrequent.
But I'm talking about with endocarditis, when there's bulging from the aortic valve.
No, never.
The right atrium. Have you seen a case?
No.
Anybody else comment? I had recently 2 cases where bulging like a mass into the right atrium, almost like thrombus.
Okay.
It turned out to be vegetation from the aortic root.
Mm-hmm.
But you beautifully explained the anatomy, I think, Pradeep, about the limbic divisions. That's beautifully done. Bob Anderson would be proud of you.
Thank you. It's all the training which I have received from Dr. Deshpande.
Is that so? You have done, yes?
Because Dr. Deshpande came into my life first. And Bob Anderson came into my life when I'm old.
No, I have not met Dr. Deshpande before.
Yes.
A pleasure to meet you.
We have a question from the Facebook page, sir. Jesus would like to know how we can differentiate post-mortem thrombi from true thrombi.
See, post-mortem thrombi, we can, sort of wash it very, very easily. Whereas antemortem is usually fixed. And then you have that characteristic, morphology of currant jelly and chicken fat. So what I rely on is the washing out of the thrombi. So if it washes out easily, even from the intertrabecular spaces, I would call it as postmortem.
And also, doesn't postmortem take up the shape of the chamber?
Yes.
Matches in beautifully.
Right.
Sir, I have one question, sir.
Yeah.
You showed one lung, cut section of a lung with that discoloration, that pulmonary thrombi, something you mentioned.
Yes.
In a fresh lung, how actually we can make out? Like, is it possible to make out, or only if it is after fixation, we can see that picture?
No. It can be made out even on fresh. In fact, it will be better seen on fresh because all areas of congestion which are bright red in the fresh state become sort of dull red and, red-brown they become. So always when we have acute pathologies, like even, for example, diffuse alveolar damage or ARDS, it is best seen in the unfixed lung specimen.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you have this infarct, it becomes very easy also to cut the lung because lung becomes firm. So it becomes very easy, in fact.
Thank you.
Have you any experience of the AV cystic tumor?
Never.
Never. You've not seen one?
Never. Never.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
It shows how rare they are.
Yes, yes. And the problem is that when we say never, it appears the next day.
Yes.
But nice to meet everybody. You must introduce us to the other people in the Zoom.
Yes, yes,
We
yeah.
will do that.
So Pranita is from where? Everybody. You must introduce
She's a current fellow in cardiovascular pathology. Pranita, say hi.
Hi. Hi, Dr. Shepherd.
Then Dr. Nagesh. This is Dr. Jatin.
Hello, Dr. Mary Shepherd. I met you at PFPU at Toronto. If you can, yeah, you took one lecture on sudden cardiac death.
Thank you. Nice again.
So it's really a small world.
Yeah.
I think
Dr. Shobha Pandit is Madam. This is another of my senior professor, Dr. Shobha Pandit Madam.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. These are my three mentors, Dr. Jaya Deshpande, Dr. Shobha Pandit, and Dr. Ammu Shivraman. I think Madam has to unveil herself. Madam Ammu. And there is Dr. Shashank Tyagi. He is also from forensic and from my institute.
Oh, it's good to have forensic people.
Yes.
That is very, very, because it's so valuable, cardiovascular.
Yes. Oh, there is Dr. I think Shashank we met in Switzerland.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
There
is Madam Shivraman. Madam Shivraman is there. And Gayat, Dr. Gayatri also, I think we met in Switzerland again.
I'm so sorry, I've been traveling. So, but I didn't want to miss the lecture. Great session.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So not a lot of questions on the Facebook page, just greetings and appreciation from around the world.
Yeah.
It's from where?
So if there are no more questions, we actually had a few announcements that we would like to make before we end the session. The first one is that this lecture, along with all our other previous lectures, are now will also be available on our YouTube channel. And we have more than 150 followers there, so we're very excited about that.
Very good.
The second thing is that we now have a monthly newsletter, and we hope that everyone will subscribe to that as well. And we have some exciting articles lined up for February. And the last thing is that we are now organizing a cardiovascular pathology quiz, and that will be conducted on the 14th of Feb. So we'll come, we'll publish all the details about the quiz very shortly, and we hope that, participants will join us from around the world.
And please announce about the SCVP speakers.
Oh, yes. And, we will be also joined by speakers from across the Atlantic from the United States. So we are expected to be joined by Dr. Mark Halushka, Dr. James Stone, and Dr. Dylan Miller. So they will be joining us in the months of April and May.
Look forward to that. And
Yes.
Ivana, good to see you, Ivana. We last met chairing a session, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a long time we've seen. Yeah, it's with everyone. Yeah, unfortunately, but let's hope that within this year everything will be more stable.
Yes. Yeah.
And of course, we had some exciting news in the morning because, Philip told us that cardiovascular pathology is trending on Twitter. So we were very excited about that.
Yes, you're all your major influencers.
Yes. Especially Dr. Sharanya and Dr. Pranita.
Yes.
It's 3 cheers to them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And we look forward to Cambridge. We hope we'll be able to, in some format.
Yes.
I have sent some tweets, and also on the Facebook page of association, I put some pictures. So hopefully people will find them.
Yes, we can also share links to that through, the different pages and groups. Yes, we will do that. So part 4 of this lecture series will now be held on the 13th of March. So, if you missed any of the earlier lectures, you can find them on YouTube. And the 4th and last lecture of this series will be on the 13th of March. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So then we come back in 2 weeks. That is going to be a session that's going to focus on the medical students. And Pranita and I will be the speakers, and we'll be talking about, that's actually part 2 of our series for medical students. And that session will focus on the cardiomyopathies and an introduction to congenital heart disease. So that will be in 2 weeks from now. All right then. So if there are no more questions or comments, I think maybe we could end the meeting here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.